podcast. Paul Mancano and Jonas Shaffer. Jonas, we got a lot to talk about here on this episode. We are going to talk about the new defensive coordinator, Zach Orr, and what he could bring to the Ravens defense. We're also going to react to what we heard from both John Harbaugh and Eric DeCosta in their final end-of-season press conference. All of that and much more coming up in just a bit. But first, let's get a quick word from our sponsors.
If you have an appetite for saving money, then you should get the Rofo Rewards app from Royal Farms. Use the Rofo Rewards app to place mobile orders for pickup or delivery and earn royalty points to redeem for free stuff. And right now, new Rofo Rewards members will get a free any-size coffee for signing up. You can download the Rofo Rewards app at the Apple App Store or Google Play today. You'll find it's a very appealing app to have. Real fresh, real fast. Royal Farms.
The CIAA Men's and Women's Basketball Tournament is February 26th through March 3rd at CFG Bank Arena. Baltimore is bringing the hoops, the culture, and the energy. So grab your tickets now and book your hotel at baltimore.org/CIAA.
All right, Jonas, the Ravens did not wait long to replace Mike Macdonald after he was hired as the next head coach of the Seattle Seahawks. They stayed in-house, and they hired 31-year-old inside linebackers coach Zach Orr to replace Macdonald as the defensive coordinator. Jonas, this is expected for John Harbaugh, who certainly loves to promote from within for that defensive coordinator spot. And boy, does this franchise love their linebackers. They love their linebackers on the field, and they love to target linebackers as future coaches.
How do you feel about a 31-year-old being a defensive coordinator? I
have three more years. That's how I feel about it.
Frick you. I don't love it for me as a sign of my growing closer to death. But this is I think probably we'll look back at this as a slam dunk decision. As you mentioned, the connections to the linebacker room. He's a Raven. He knows what it means to play like a Raven, whether you believe in that adage or just think it's just something you put up on a poster. I think it matters here. He has that familiarity with Mike Macdonald. He was a guy who worked with Mike Macdonald as Mike Macdonald was kind of climbing the ranks here. So there is that familiarity. I think we talked about it earlier this week. Just there is a lot that you can absorb from a guy from working with him. Mm-hmm. And I think we'll see that. He'll have to put his own twists on this 2024 Ravens defense because Mike Macdonald was going to have to put his own twists on this 2024 defense, losing some of the guys that we expect him to. But credit to John for getting this sorted as quickly as he did. We don't know if this decision is going to end up working out for the Ravens, but it's one heck of a foundation to work for. If you've got three potential All-Pros on that defense, if you've got Anthony Weaver potentially coming back, Chris Hewitt coming back, the young up-and-comers on this staff. So it's going to be really interesting to see just the kind of praise and plaudits and, just superlatives that guys have for Zach Orr, because so far, you look at Twitter, you look at social media, you guys who used to coach with him, used to play for him, used to play with him, all positive so far.
We will touch on the Anthony Weaver factor, whether he is going to stay in Baltimore, what we heard from John Harbaugh on that, as well as another assistant coach and Chris Hewitt. But real quick, just on Zach Orr as a person, a fascinating trajectory to reach all the way up to defensive coordinator at age 31. He is the second youngest defensive coordinator in the NFL right now. Undrafted as a player out of University of North Texas, and went on to become a second-team All-Pro inside linebacker for the Ravens in his third season, playing alongside C.J. Mosley. That was back in 2015. He was one of their better defensive players on a team that was not very good. I believe that was the 5-11 team. And then was forced to step away from the field because of a congenital neck spine condition in 2016. But he wanted to stay in the organization. They wanted to keep him in the organization. So they transitioned him over to the analyst side of things. And he slowly worked his way up from there. Went on to coach the Jaguars outside linebackers in 2021. That was not a very good season for the Jaguars, nor for that defense. He comes back to Baltimore to coach the inside linebackers in 2022 and has been coaching that unit for the last 2 years. A very interesting trajectory for a guy that at this point, had he not had that congenital neck spine issue, he might still be playing for the Baltimore Ravens, or at least in the NFL at a somewhat high level. CJ Mosley, I believe, was a rookie that year in 2015, and he is still playing at a pretty high level in the NFL. Second team All-Pro in his third season after being undrafted for Zach Orr. So obviously a very bright football player on the field, very, cognizant of the role that the inside linebacker plays on the defense. And now he's ascended all the way up to DC.
And regardless of how bad this season goes for the Ravens, I think Zach Orr can take confidence knowing that it will never be as bad as 2021 went with the Jaguars, because in this case, you have John Harbaugh looking over your shoulder. In 2021, I would say it was Urban Meyer looking over your shoulder, but he was probably at a bar doing God
Dancing,
knows what with God knows who. So a much more stable organization for the Ravens. It's a little bit different from the Mike Macdonald situation because, as John Harbaugh was asked about, there is that degree of risk in taking on a play caller who has not actually called plays.
Right.
That is something to get figured out. I don't know how much substitute there is for the real thing you can get until you actually get to the real thing. So Ravens might have to take their lumps. Mike Macdonald certainly took his lumps in that, September stretch, not this past season, but the season before, losing to the Bills, losing to the Dolphins, collapsing in both those games. But if Zach Orr is the real deal, then we'll see those goods come to the surface before long.
Yeah, I mean, Mike Macdonald was in college the last time the Ravens saw him in 2022 or 2021, I should say, coaching for his brother Jim Harbaugh, but he was calling plays. He was a defensive coordinator, and he had that experience in the NFL as well on the Ravens staff. The speed at which the Ravens moved on and were able to get this deal done for Chris Orr tells me that they were certainly expecting Mike Macdonald to at least get strong consideration as an NFL head coach. And why not? He interviewed, I believe, with 5 teams and ended up getting that deal from the Seahawks. But I also think it was interesting because we threw out the names, Chris Hewitt. We threw out the name Anthony Weaver, who is an associate head coach on this team. And John Harbaugh said he is interviewing for the Miami Dolphins defensive coordinator job. Were you surprised at all because he is a little bit more of a senior member and he has a little bit more experience with John Harbaugh, and he has, a better title coming into this than Zach Orr?
Yeah, I think the early Vegas favorite probably would have been Weaver because of everything you just mentioned, because of that seniority, because of that experience, because he is the assistant head coach. But I think it was pretty telling how John Harbaugh described the situation and what might happen with Miami. He said that even if he's offered that job, there's no guarantee that he takes that job with the Dolphins. I think there's a lot of love, a lot of understanding, a lot of mutual respect between John Harbaugh and Anthony Weaver. An understanding that I think what you get with Anthony Weaver is a culture guy. The Commanders were willing to have him as a top 3 finalist for that job, despite him not having called plays since 2020 with a bad Texans defense. I think folks around the NFL know what Anthony Weaver stands for. They know who he is. And yes, calling plays for a defense as talented as the Ravens probably would have helped and probably would help his head coaching credentials, his head coaching resume next offseason, 2 offseasons from now. But it is what it is. And I think folks, know that Anthony Weaver stands for something, and he wouldn't have gotten those head coaching interviews, not just in DC, but in Atlanta without them.
It is interesting how we've seen a couple coaches in this coaching cycle pass up the opportunity for seeming promotions around the NFL. We saw Bobby Slowick stay in Houston. We saw Ben Johnson stay in Detroit, and Anthony Weaver, after getting a couple interviews for head coaching jobs, may not even take a defensive coordinator job in the NFL. But Jonas, in terms of Zach Orr and the kind of defense he will run, we heard John Harbaugh say it's still going to be a Ravens-style defense. What does that tell you about the kind of defense that he plans to run?
Yeah, I think it's just going to be a lot of what we've seen schematically from this Ravens defense this year. It's going to be a lot of light boxes. They're going to play too high. They're going to be creative with their blitz pressures. They're going to have guys line up in multiple spots. It's a lot of what we saw from Mike Macdonald defenses the past 2 years. It's creative, it's innovative. Hopefully the system doesn't change too much so that the guys coming in do not have anywhere near the kind of learning curves, the bumps and the bruises that you get with previous systems, with other systems. I know that was a big issue under Wink Martindale for certain people, just understanding where to be, communication and everything. But again, that familiarity and experience with the Mike Macdonald system and how it's taught and the rules and everything that when it's going according to plan really makes the defense hum, I'm sure will be what we see from this Ravens defense. And again, if certain guys get hurt, if certain guys level up, then this defense could look nothing like what last year's defense did. But I still think it'll be a lot more similar to what we saw in 2023 than different. I don't think we're going to go back to the Wink Martindale days of blitzing every time you drop back to pass.
I think it's interesting also that this promotion comes from the inside linebacker position that could be losing one of its two starters in Patrick Queen. We heard John Harbaugh and Eric DeCosta talk about that as well. And Patrick Queen did tweet out last night his excitement for Zach Orr getting this job. I don't think any fans should read anything into that and think that it would be any more likely that Patrick Queen would return to this team just based off who they hired as their coordinator.
No, I'm not taking any kind of discount to come back and play for a coach. I'm getting that bag. There's obviously a lot of love in that position group on defense, but I would not at this point in Patrick Queen's career. You can't begrudge him for leaving Baltimore, leaving the position coach that he likes, leaving a group of linebackers that he really loves to go, make 18, 20, 22 million, however much money he's going to make. I mean,
right.
Well, let's just be realistic about this thing.
Yeah. Let's also talk about what we heard from Eric DeCosta and John Harbaugh in that press conference. And DeCosta talking about Patrick Queen was very complimentary, talking about how great of a player he is, how he had a phenomenal season. But it seemed like there was very little regret about not picking up his fifth-year option. The Ravens, of course, allowing him to hit free agency. DeCosta said good for him for being able to put himself in a position to have a career year and be able to cash in now in free agency. But just based off those comments and, read into GM talk as much as you'd like. We talked about before the season ended how it was unlikely that Patrick Queen was going to return to this team just because of the amount of money they gave Roquan Smith, because of their belief in Trenton Simpson, the third-round pick, and their ability to develop other players and draft players to replace players that they might lose in free agency. The comments from DeCosta, I think, did nothing but affirm our belief that Patrick Queen is likely headed for the door.
Yeah, and that they're going to do whatever they can to keep Justin Madubuike in-house. Interesting to hear Eric DeCosta reference the misgivings, the apprehensions of last year with the Lamar Jackson situation, not really knowing what was going to happen. There's a little bit more cost certainty now with Justin Madubuike because these guys know what it would cost to put the franchise tag on him. I'm sure they have a pretty good idea of what it would take to re-sign him. I think probably right now that the cheaper option in terms of, average salary per year is probably that franchise tag, but it's not going to be cheap either way. So they have a while to slap that franchise tag on him. They don't have to rush into any considerations. They got to let guys know where they stand, that they've got to figure out, more and more of their draft order, of their big board. But again, I don't think that this defense, I don't think this front office is prepared to lose someone as Justin Madubuike at this point in his career.
What did you make of the responses that John Harbaugh had off the top of the press conference to the questions he got about the Ravens game plan in the AFC Championship game and whether the Ravens were running the ball enough, what their game plan was coming in and whether they diverted from it? Seemed like he was not regretting their decision to be as pass happy as they were.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you go back and watch that film, you do see those heavy boxes. John said that they were daring us to run the ball, or daring the Ravens to pass the ball, because they were lining up with a lot of guys at the line of scrimmage, and the Ravens, put Lamar in positions with those RPOs to decide whether he was going to pass or run. Sometimes when he passed, it was not the right decision. Sometimes when he ran, it wasn't the right decision. So I don't want to say John was sharing the blame, but I do think he was saying that, listen, it wasn't all on Todd Monken, wasn't all on the offensive line. There were some situations where Lamar had the RPO and it was just defended well, or maybe, the right call wasn't made. I mean, I think if you were on Ravens Twitter or film Twitter the past couple of days, there was, that play call where I think it's the screen to the right and Lamar keeps it and throws it to Zay and it's incomplete. And there is an advantage if he just makes that handoff to Justice Hill,
right?
On a power play coming up the left side, that if those blocks are hit, Justice Hill probably goes for at least 10 to 15 yards. So credit to the Chiefs, credit to Steve Spagnuolo for really throwing a wrench in the Ravens' plans. But, we thought that this would be the kind of game where Lamar, having had the rest, having had the experience, that he would have been able to figure things out. And he and Todd Monken, I guess, just were not at a spot right now in their career together, in their partnership together, where they were able to make it work.
Yeah, and we talked about how it was never more than a 10-point game, and the Ravens had numerous opportunities, even in the second half, to try to get back to the run and try to reestablish it, and they just never took that opportunity. Harbaugh did say, we're not thinking about during the game how we're going to answer the questions in the press conference afterwards. And if I had to guess, I'm guessing he looked at the stats after the game and said, boy, we probably should have run it more than 11 times. But during the course of the game, you're not thinking about the run-pass ratio as much as you're thinking about how do we pick up yardage. And maybe there was a little bit of premature urgency from the coaching staff, talking about how they wanted to score points quickly, how, the Chiefs come right down in their first two possessions of the game and score touchdowns, and maybe lead you to believe that this team is going to need, that the Ravens are going to need to score touchdowns on nearly every possession. They're going to need to go throw for throw with Patrick Mahomes to stay in this game. And maybe they weren't expecting the defense to pitch a shutout in the second half. We certainly weren't, based on the fact that the Chiefs scored 17 in the first half, and they are the Kansas City Chiefs. But when it was all said and done, the Ravens did allow the Chiefs to dictate the game in that way. And they allowed themselves to get away from their game plan, maybe a little bit too much based on what they thought was occurring. And then after the fact, it turns out it was a closer game than they thought. And they didn't need to be as urgent as they were in the third and fourth quarters.
Yeah. Harbaugh said today, told us that they ran a lot of 2-minute offense, a lot of 4-minute offense, which means that you're not spending a lot of time running the ball.
Right.
It's just as simple as that. And I don't think this press conference is going to, make any Ravens fans feel better about the lack of runs, because the process is what it is. The results are what they are. And frankly, they kind of stink. But, it does make sense that in certain situations they felt less inclined to run because, as you said, left unsaid was the probably the realization or the fear that the Chiefs would score at least 10 more points.
Right.
And they scored 0. And that's what makes the Zay Flowers fumble so heartbreaking. That's what makes the Zay Likely interception all the more galling, because there were opportunities for the Ravens to come back and put the Chiefs in an uncomfortable position. And they just never got close enough to really make them shake in their boots.
Speaking of Lamar, I thought you asked Kyle Goon asked a good question, I should say, about where the AFC Championship game performance fits into their overall evaluation of Lamar Jackson. I think there is a little bit of an obsession on NFL Twitter in general with ring culture, and anybody who doesn't win the championship, the season is seen as a failure. And if a quarterback can't get over the hump, the team has to move on from him. The team has to do something drastic. The Ravens are being very patient, and they understand that an MVP season, maybe not outweighs, but is taken into consideration when you're looking at his overall performance. And one game, the AFC Championship game, even though it was the most important game of the season, does not define Lamar Jackson's season. But they certainly believe that another year with Todd Monken's offense, another year with Zay Flowers and a full offseason of no contract questions and only focusing on football would be beneficial to Lamar.
I'm kind of torn on this because, yes, this is their first year with Todd Monken, but look how many play callers and changes that someone like, Patrick Mahomes has had to go through in Kansas City. The whole issue for me is Lamar, incredible talent, transcendent talent, but he has not yet transcended in the playoffs his surroundings.
Right.
Wrote a story that's probably up right now by the time you're listening to this. Maybe if you're streaming this, you can watch it. You can read the story right now. But like
on the BaltimoreBanner.com, or you can subscribe $1 for 6 months.
Every single time that Lamar and the Ravens have lost with Lamar in the playoffs, his EPA per play, which is a pretty good metric, not by no means perfect, but like one of the 5 worst of that playoff that playoff season in general. So you think of 2018, rookie, just that offense doesn't score a touchdown until the fourth quarter against the Chargers. A year later against the Titans, again, don't score a touchdown until the fourth quarter of that stunning loss to Tennessee. The next year, he has a pretty good game against Tennessee, gets that revenge on them in the wild card round. But they go to Buffalo, divisional round, and the one time they come close to scoring a touchdown, it's a pick 6. So, we thought that with Lamar having Todd Monken, new weapons, new empowerment, that this would be a turning of the corner, so to speak. And to his credit, by far the best, playoff performance of his career was in that game against Houston. But again, you get to the championship game round at home, banged up Chiefs defense, still very talented Chiefs defense. But again, right now, that performance, as it stands, EPA wise, one of the 5 worst by any quarterback in the playoffs this year. So I understand that there are these certain provisions and certain caveats that you have to apply to it. But I think maybe the thing that we didn't push John and Eric on hard enough is like, why hasn't Lamar been able to kind of grab this offense by the scruff of its neck and say, you're safe with me, buddy. Let's go to another level. Because even though there was that magnificent performance against the Texans, there's just been too many times now where it's been stuck in the mud and there's been no good response from the offense, the teammates, Lamar, play caller, whoever, to say, we're going to overcome this, because the defense in all those losses has been really, really good. I mean, the Titans game, the score is a little bit deceiving because of the short fields that they dealt with back in 2019, but the defense has given Lamar and the Ravens enough to get at least 1 win, maybe 2. And to hear John say, oh, just wait till next year, was frankly a little bit disappointing.
It was. I do understand it from his perspective, just because they just paid the guy $260 million.
Yeah, you're not going
to make a change at quarterback. You want to continue to empower him. I don't know what he could have said in the press conference that would have been satisfactory. I mean, maybe if he had just come out and said Lamar needs to be better in those big time games, but I would have been surprised if he had said that, because that would be a pretty big call out that would draw a lot of attention from the media. I also understand the theory that he could get better in this offense, like you said. I will push back on the Patrick Mahomes comparison just because I think it's so unfair to compare anybody to Patrick Mahomes. And he has had the same play caller. I mean, Andy Reid is still going to be an elite play caller and has been his play caller his entire career. But like we talked about with the defense, and like Roquan Smith said after that game, we want to be back here, but it's going to be a process. The Ravens offense and Lamar Jackson could take another step forward, but it's going to be a process. They're probably going to lose OBJ and Nelson Aguilar in free agency. They're probably going to have to get a new group of weapons. They're probably going to have to make changes. They might have to, deal with, maybe T. Martin gets a head coach, or not a head coaching, but an offensive coordinator job. There are going to be ways in which they regress. They're going to be without J.K. Dobbins, and they're probably going to lose Gus Edwards in free agency next year. So they're going to take another step back in some ways. And so Lamar has to continually, this is the problem with having, a good offense and a good team, is that you create envy, and other teams are going to poach your coaches, your assistant coaches, other teams are going to poach your players, your weapons, and Lamar Jackson, now being paid what he is going to be taking up quite a lot of cap space, which is going to limit the team's ability to add weapons. So he is going to, yes, they could take a step forward in a lot of ways, but they could also take a step slightly back. And you have to trust that he is going to take this offense not just to where it was in 2023, but up to a new level.
And I think that there is plenty of reason to believe that he can do that. We didn't get a whole lot of definition today on the future of someone like Ronnie Stanley. I would imagine that I think it makes more sense for him to come back than not, just because of the capital required to find a true blue
starting left tackle.
But Zay Flowers is a potential wide receiver 1. Rashad Bateman, they seem really high on. Tyler Linderbaum could be an all-pro. Isaiah Likely, Mark Andrews, one of the best tight end pairings in the NFL.
Mm-hmm.
The defense, as we said, should be really good. Special teams should be really good. We don't know just how daunting or undaunting the schedule might be, but
it's going to be a first-place schedule.
Yeah. It comes down to Lamar, and I think one of the reasons we were excited about the Ravens potentially getting to the Super Bowl is just so that you and I wouldn't have to deal with this whole narrative about Lamar and the playoffs. And we are staring at, even if this team goes 14-2, or 14-3, 17-0, 10-7 next year, if they get to a certain point in the playoffs where it's on Lamar's plate to have that breakthrough, there is going to be this, hard-earned skepticism because we just haven't seen it yet.
Right.
And we were so excited for the Ravens to break through against Mahomes, not because of the possibility, not because we were having any doubt about Mahomes. It was just because of our own belief and confidence in this team being able to overcome whatever deficiencies or pebbles in the shoe might have come around. But it didn't happen, and now we are going into year 7 of wondering, if not now, when.
Right. That's the question that it comes back to, because this seemed to be the Ravens' best opportunity, and might be the Ravens' best opportunity for a couple of years, because this Chiefs offense was so devoid of top-tier weapons, because the Ravens had home field advantage. They were the 1 seed. They had the home crowd behind them. They had OBJ. They had Nelson Aguilar. They still had Gus Edwards. They had Mike McDonald on this defense, running this defense. So it seemed like their best opportunity for them to break through. And so when everything is set up for Lamar like that, and he still fell short, I think that's where the concern factor, and that's where the impatience starts to come in. But, we talked about before the season, if they had reached the AFC Championship game, I think we both would have been happy, just given those results. But then as you got through the course of the season, they win 13 regular season games. They have a first-round bye. It becomes harder to stomach when they lose by 7 to the Chiefs in the AFC Championship game at home. Still, DaCosta and Harbaugh still view the season as a success. I think they have to, because not everything can be about, whether you win the Super Bowl or not. But the expectations changed as the season went on, and the expectations got a whole lot higher for this group. So you wonder if they're going to be better set up at any point in the near future to make a legitimate Super Bowl run.
I mean, there's going to be a lot of inevitable comparisons about the transition from 2011 to 2012, and how 2011 was a dynamite Ravens team that could not get to the Super Bowl. 2012, a less talented Ravens team wins the Super Bowl. 2023, number 1 in DVOA, one of the best teams of all time, going into the playoffs by that metric. 2024 Ravens probably will be a step down, but if they can muster enough lessons, courage, whatever kind of kismet is out there to get through to playoffs, because I think the expectation is that next year this should be a playoff team.
Right.
Again, it's going to be a loaded AFC, but if they can just do the right things, be at the right spots at the right times, and just find a way to break through, then whatever misery Ravens fans are going through right now will hopefully have been worth it.
You wonder if they think that just running it back as much of it as they possibly can, replacing Mike McDonald with Chris Orr, trying to re-sign as many free agents as they can of their own. You wonder if, they think 9 times out of 10, they win that game against the Chiefs. And that this is the one game where they commit way too many penalties. They get a little bit unlucky. Some things don't bounce their way. They're not able to come out with a victory. It's a gamble, but that's probably the safest path that they can take going forward, is just to run back of it as much as they can and hope that they get a different result if they run into the Chiefs in the playoffs again.
Yeah, there's a lot of young talent on this team. There's guys that you can bring back on reasonable deals, but every team is different. There's only so many times that you can bring back, like the 94 to 95 to 96 Bulls. It's tough with the financial realities being what they are. Some guys are going to get hurt. Some guys are going to merge. Some guys are going to fall off.
Yeah, you just hope that Eric DaCosta won't be booed anytime he's comes to a game after he retires. Jonas, we should probably get out of here. You're getting called by radio stations left and right, so you've got some work to do. At Jonas_Shaffer is his Twitter handle. He's writing great stuff already on the BaltimoreBanner.com, as is Gianna Hahn, as is Kyle Goon. I'm at Paul Mancano and at All Banner Sports. We'll have another episode for you this Tuesday at 11 a.m.